November is Adoption Month, and there's no better time than the present to talk about and understand a little bit more about the significant process and what it entails. The adoption process can be a lengthy one, so it's important that prospective parents are prepared. One of the most frequently debated questions surrounding adoption also is whether parents have the right to decide whether or not they tell their child that they are adopted. Well, joining us now to explain the process and challenges in adoption is Dr. Mary Elizabeth Kruger, who is a social worker and member of the South African Association for Social Workers in Private Practice. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Kruger. Thank you so much for joining us.
Only my pleasure.
Now, Dr. Kruger, let's just start off with the different phases of the adoption process. Can you just talk us through them?
Right. Adoption is a very sensitive and a complicated process because we're dealing with the highest of emotions. On the one hand, you have the emotions of the biological parent who have to make the most difficult decision of their life to be able to consent to the child being adopted. And on the other hand, you have the emotions of the adoptive parents who will do anything to be able to get the child. So the whole process is a balancing act, that it can be a win-win situation for all of it. So the first part of the process is the counseling with the biological parents, because you have to look at what are their different options. Why are they considering adoption? Is this the best option for them and for the child at that stage? But not only then, it must also prove to be the best decision 20, 30 years from then. So, and it must be a decision that they will be able to live with. So that counseling is very intensive. Then on the other part, you have the screening of the adoptive parents, where one has to look at what is their motivation to adopt. It must be, the focus must not just be on the need, the emotional need to get the child, but they must really be there for the child, and it must be the child's best interest at all times. So it's a lifelong commitment. When the child is naughty, there's no option of bringing the child back and say the child was naughty, like with your own children. And I think that is an important part where people need to realize that this is a permanent commitment, that your child, the child, whether it's a normal birth or a cesarean, it's still your child. Adoption should be viewed as another way to get your child. And that is why on the adoption order, it also states that once the adoption is finalized, it's as if the child was born from you. And I think that is something that the adoptive parents really need to be aware of, and be committed to that. So then the process follows that there will be, when the screening is done and the counseling is done, the matching process to match a baby or a child with specific adoptive parents. And then, of course, the whole process in finalizing, placing the child with them, finalizing the adoption, having it registered at the Registrar of Adoptions.
And how long is this process normally? Are we speaking a matter of months, or could it even take years to finalize?
You know, because there's so many different people involved in the process. Like, for instance, one have to submit your final report to Department of Social and Development, who have to issue a Section 239 recommendation letter. That is unpredictable. Sometimes it takes quick and sometimes it takes longer. And then also you can't predict the time it will take at court. So for the social worker to do the part, that can be done fairly quickly, depending on what the situation is and whether, you know, the parents are certain and whether they struggle with the decision and there's a possibility of withdrawing, then it takes a bit longer. But overall, you know, it's, so like I say, it's difficult, it's unpredictable, because you can't predict for court or for other people. But round about 2 years, I would say, you know, less preferably, but it can take up to 2 years, sometimes perhaps even longer.
And in your experience, what are the main reasons that parents decide to opt for adoption?
You know, for a parent, the parent that considered adoption, obviously it wasn't a planned pregnancy. And then to sit there and make a decision, what if I can't take care of this child? So what will be the responsible decision to do? The child hasn't asked to be there, so this parent can now either think of themselves and just abandon the baby and move on because they don't want to and are not ready to take the responsibility because of their circumstances. It may be financial, it may be home circumstances, it can be emotional that they're just not ready. But then to make that decision, to come up with the consent or the agreement to consent to an adoption, it means that that parent have to set themselves and their feelings aside and act in what is in the best interest of the children. And I think that is something that everybody that's part of the process and not always understand the torment the biological parent goes through in making this decision. Mm-hmm. So once they've made that decision, that should be respected. Part of the counseling is that you explain to them there's a 60-day cooling off period where they can withdraw their consent. But most of them, once they've made this decision, they want that to be respected and they want to be supported in seeing that through. And that is, for me, that's the sad part, that people often focus on the parents' right to withdraw the consent, and therefore they, for instance, don't approve that the baby be placed with a prospective adoptive parents immediately for the sake of that cooling off period. But no parent, having gone through all the emotions and made this decision, would like their child hanging in the air. They need that peace of mind to know the child is where they've chosen the child to be, and not hang in the air. And it's when they feel that that decision of them is not respected, that's when you get babies being abandoned, because the parent just can't take that responsibility anymore.
And Dr. Kruger, there's another issue that's been debated rather highly, and that's the issue of whether or not the adoptive parents should tell the child that they've adopted that indeed they have been adopted. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. That's not even a question. The damage that you do, a child completely trusts his parents. And that's not a secret that you can keep. You may think you can keep the secret now, but somewhere, somehow, someone is going to mention something. And the damage that does when the child finds out from someone else, and not his parents, that you can't turn that around. I've had a lady in counseling who was in her 30s. She was married. She had children of her own. Both her parents have passed away. And then at a family wedding, a family member mentioned that she and her brother were adopted, and they never knew it. And she felt that her whole life was a lie. And the love that she had for her parents, that immediately turned into hatred. And she said, but not even my medical history is my true medical history. So you can't do that. If that's the way that you want to approach adoption and think you can keep it secret and not tell the child, then you shouldn't do adoption at all. And what I normally do is that I let the adoptive parents create a profile of themselves, and when the baby is placed, that they then put the adoption order, the photos, everything in that, and they turn it into a life storybook for the child, and then use that to tell the child about the adoption. It's also not something that you do once. It needs to be adoption needs to be a normal thing, and the child needs to experience that it's normal. It's not a label hang around his neck because he's adopted. So if the parents tell the child and they do it in different ways, age-appropriate ways, over a period of time, the child doesn't feel that there's something wrong with it and that they are rejected. So then you can trust the parents, and then you don't have issues afterwards where the child goes through all this identity crisis and they're asking, but what about my roots? It's the child's right to know that.
Now, Dr. Kruger, just lastly, in about a minute and a half, talk to us about some of the considerations that parents considering adopting in a cross-cultural, cross-racial manner need to consider.
Right, I think firstly, again, it's the motivation, why they want to do it, and then to realize it's not only for them and to fill their emotional need, but how are they going to help that child adjust in the family and in their friends, their social circle? They must also accept that child. So you can't keep the child at home if it's the child is not accepted, and that way you're doing more harm than good. So, and how motivated are they, and how are they going to explore the child's culture, and how are they going to keep that for the child alive? What are they going to do? Expose the child to, give the child the necessary knowledge. They need to be prepared to do that.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing those insights. I'm sure some of our viewers have been enlightened and they'll be able to make better decisions regarding adoption in the months and years to come. That was Dr. Kruger, who's a social worker and a member of the South African Association of Social Workers in Private Practice.